Hello, ClassicsToday.com insiders. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor, here with the 10 best recordings of the inimitable Leopold Stokowski. Oh my goodness, this is going to be so much fun. Now, Stokowski was born, I think, in 1882, and he died around, 1977, somewhere in there. He was like 95. He made recordings up until literally the last minute of his life. He was remarkable in so many ways. He was remarkable for his what we used to call old style manipulation of what the composer wrote in a way which I don't think any other conductor known to mankind has ever attempted. He would rewrite, he would rescore, he would cut, he would change, he would futz with, he was unbelievable that way. But he did everything, as I said in the preview video for this, with 100%, 110% conviction. And he just sort of silenced criticism. Yeah, people would sit around and say, oh, he did not have the best taste. There's healthy vulgarity. Well, what was the vulgarity? The vulgarity was in doing things that people liked. The vulgarity was in being thrilling, was in making recordings that were so much fun that you couldn't stop listening to them, and being a genuine entertainer. And that, of course, in the classical music world was it was unthinkable, an abomination for some people. But, the funny thing is, he was no more interventionist oft times than people like Furtwängler and the German school conductors. If you listen to Hermann Abendroth play Brahms, he's every bit as interventionist as Stokowski ever was. Furtwängler and his Beethoven messing about with tempos. The end of Furtwängler's doing the end of the Ninth. That was completely insane what he did. And every bit as crazy as Stokowski. But when Furtwängler does it, well, he was German. He was German, and so, oh my goodness, it was serious, it was philosophical, it was transcendental. But when Stokowski did it, oh, it was cheap, it was pandering, it was mere entertainment. There's such a double standard. It's such hypocritical crap. It makes me crazy. So Stokowski was a genius in his way. My colleague Jed Disler and I have always had this ongoing banter about performers and conductors, chord guys versus line guys. Chord guys are people who are concerned with sound, with the vertical sonority of a piece of music, with the texture and timbre. And line guys are contrapuntists. They're not so interested in the mere sonic voluptuousness of a piece. They want you to hear clarity and inner lines. One of the classic line guys was George Zell. One of the classic chord guys was Karajan. But Stokowski was the chord guy to end all chord guys. Part of the fact that he was a chord guy is evidenced in his concern for sonics, for engineering, his pioneering use of different recording techniques, of orchestral positioning, putting the violins in different places and the basses in different places, and permitting free bowing in the strings so they're not all doing everything in unison to create a more voluptuous texture. That was all Stokowski's concern with sonority. And so not only did he make a bazillion recordings for every conceivable label known to mankind. He was all over the place because he didn't care what label he worked for. The reason he didn't care was because he determined what his records sounded like. There's so many artists who don't care what their records sounded like, but Stokowski cared. And because he cared, we care. And because he cared, we hear things. We hear what he wanted us to hear. And as often as not, that's just overwhelmingly convincing. But I have to be very, very, very clear in making this selection of the 10 best recordings, my selection of the 10 best recordings. I am not including any of the 78s, which means none of the pre-LP era mono Philadelphia recordings. Now, Stokowski was famous for putting the Philadelphia Orchestra on the map. And the recordings he made with the Philadelphia Orchestra, especially his Wagner recordings and things like that, were historic. They remain historic. They were, for their day, superb sonically. They had some amazing playing from the Philadelphia Orchestra. But as with other videos in this series, I continue to insist that in order to appreciate the greatness of a recording, you have to hear the music. And however fabulous, however technically advanced he was for his day, 78s are 78s, mono is mono. I mean, early mono. I mean, 50s mono is another issue entirely. But early mono is early mono. And it is completely, to me, unreasonable to expect particularly newcomers to listen to those old recordings and to really get a feel for what he could do, because what he could do was all about the timbre and the sound of the orchestra. And there was nobody like Stokowski that way. You know, when he was in front of an orchestra, it didn't matter what orchestra it was. He got his sound out of them. There are so few conductors who could do that. Really few. Klemperer could do that. There were a couple of us, and Klemperer admired Stokowski, probably because Stokowski performed one of Klemperer's works, the Merry Waltz. He was one of the few conductors who would perform another conductor who was a contemporary composer. And that's the other thing about Stokowski, because not only was he completely indifferent to the sanctity of the classics, totally indifferent. He would rearrange and cut and trim and do whatever he wanted to do. But he was unbelievably respectful, for the most part, when he played contemporary music. And nobody did more contemporary music and made it fun and made audiences enjoy it. I mean, the list of premieres he gave is astounding. And when he did a complex modern work, as often as not, it was the most faithful, marvelous, convincing interpretation of it that we've ever heard. There are some pieces he played, modern pieces, the performances of which have never been equaled. Maybe equaled, never surpassed. It's astonishing. It's amazing what he did. And I just think that it's so special to imagine a conductor who is, on the one hand, reviled as a theatrical showman of questionable taste in the classics, but who at the same time is possibly the greatest living exponent of contemporary music, the work of living composers. I mean, it's such a paradox. And I think it was because of that the hypocrisy of the musical world, which is legion, was never quite able to wrap its brain around him. Because just as he would do, a Brahms or a Beethoven symphony that was completely twisted, he would then give the world premiere of something astonishing and do it in such a way as to silence criticism entirely. And what do you say about that? He was wonderful. He kept everybody guessing. He really did. He was the way he handled himself in his career as well was genius. I mean, it was absolute genius. So let's talk about these 10 recordings with the proviso, as I said, that they are all modern recordings, and the other proviso that even at the very end of his life, he was just as good as he ever was. He never slowed down, like some conductors. They get slower and slower and slower at all. He always had the same life, the same vigor, the same keen ear for what he was doing. And if you watch some of his videos, especially in old age, he's sort of like, well, now we're going to do this. You have no idea how he does it. And he's kind of grumpy all the time. He's always sort of yelling at people. I'll tell you what to do and you do it. Blah, blah, blah. He's totally, you don't know how he does it, but he does it. He didn't use a baton most of the time. He used his hands. He said it was in the eyes when you could see them. He had one that kind of drooped like mine does. I felt very good about that. He just did it. We'll never know the secret, but we have the recordings. And as I said, he didn't care what orchestra, he didn't care what label. It was him. I don't think there has been a 20th century conductor who had that level of personal charisma. Maybe Toscanini did. I don't know, but it was unbelievable. So let's get to it, shall we? And we will discuss why and how and what. So first, we have to do something with his Wagner. We just do, because his Wagner was he was one of the few people alive who had the guts to reorchestrate Wagner. And I think that's marvelous, because he didn't care about telling Wagner how it ought to be done. And I just, I have such respect for the man. So my Stokowski Wagner highlight, and some of you who know me will know this, is the Magic Fire music from Die Walküre with the Houston Symphony on Everest. Now here it is. It also comes with his Parsifal Act 3 symphonic synthesis. He was really a composer too. He made arrangements of all these operas for a pure orchestra, and of course the Bach transcriptions, which we'll get to. Really, really amazing. And this Magic Fire music has how he recorded it and got the Houston Symphony Orchestra to sound the way it did. I have no idea. I mean, did you know that there was an organ in the Magic Fire music? Well, neither did Wagner. But there is one here, I guarantee. When the fire springs up, the organ comes in going, wah, wah. I don't know. And of course, the end of Die Walküre is a gorgeous chord for woodwinds alone. The sonority is marvelous. Nah, not for Stokowski. It's an ethereal chord for the high violins. It's just insanely twisted. And there's a sound sample down below this video that you can listen to yourself. So number one has to be the Magic Fire music, but Stokowski's Wagner was always pretty special, and go to town on it. It's so much fun. Next, is Debussy's La Mer. I love his La Mer. One of the things about Stokowski, one of the things that made his interpretation so convincing, is that he was a quick conductor. A lot of conductors who are sound guys, who are chord guys, people like Sinopoli, for example, and even sometimes Karajan, but they could be terribly slow. They moan about the sound they're making, and the result is soggy. But Stokowski's sound was as rich and voluptuous as anyone's in the world, but it never was at the expense of rhythm, and it usually moved swiftly. So it left you wanting more and never sounded sticky. And La Mer is a fabulous example of that, I think. The opening allegro, once it gets moving in the first movement, is one of the swiftest on disc. It's really remarkable. And the finale, whoa, is it exciting until it stays exciting. Don't worry, the excitement doesn't go away. But the tempo gets cut in half for the final jump, bum, ba, da, da, psh, crash with the tam-tam. And of course, because the piece ends with a giant trill and hold, it gets slower and louder and bigger until the final tam-tam crescendo that threatens to inundate the entire universe. Of course, Debussy never wrote a tam-tam crescendo there, but who cares? It's Stokowski. It's great. So that's this one here. I mean, the whole list of works with the orchestras and labels is below this video, so I don't have to get into that. But it's on this disc. It's Phase 4. It's part of this, hang on. I mean, it's been issued and reissued a million times, but right now it's in this Decca Phase 4 Stokowski box. And it's coupled with all kinds of things. You'd never know La Mer is on here unless you look at the booklet. But the other stuff that's on here is, oof. I mean, there's the Ravel, Daphnis, and Chloe's Suite No. 2, which has the extra choral scream after the piece theoretically ends. It ends again, only differently. And then there's the Charles Ives Orchestral Set No. 2 in a dynamite performance at a time when nobody was doing it. And Messiaen's L'Ascension in a phenomenal performance that no one else has ever bettered. I mean, those are great, and they're extremely faithful to the intentions of the composer. Whereas the Ravel and the Debussy, well, those are a little bit more open to question. But the Debussy La Mer is just hot. Next, oh yes, a contemporary work that should be standard repertoire, but it's a little awkward to perform. It's the Frank Martin Petite Symphonie Concertante. Now, that work is for double-string orchestra, harp, harpsichord, and piano. And because of the strange forces involved, it doesn't get played as much as it ought to. It is a masterpiece, a fantastic piece of music. And Stokowski recorded this in the 50s with his own orchestra, which was just a pickup group. And it's in the EMI Stokowski box here. Warner now, I guess. This icon box that they were doing. And again, it has never been bettered. It is still the reference, I believe, the reference recording for that work. A perfect performance in stupendous sound, where you get to hear everything. It's just incredible. Absolutely incredible. Next, well, we have to do Scheherazade. And in order to do Scheherazade, you need to have the Phase 4, the Decca Phase 4 recording from the Decca box, because he remade it for RCA, and there were earlier ones too. Who knows how many times he recorded Scheherazade. His version of it, and it was his version of it, involved some added xylophone parts in the second movement and some extra wax on the tam-tam in the finale and all kinds of other stuff. But if you want to hear the sexy, voluptuous sound that Stokowski was able to get out of the orchestra, this thing with the London Symphony, there's nothing like it. Absolutely nothing like it. It is so over-mic'd and over-conducted and over-ripe and over everything. It's totally astonishing, and you're going to just love it. Absolutely love it. So this is the one on Decca, and you just got to go for it. It's phenomenally, excitingly amazing. Let's see, what do we got next? Oh, here we go. Oh, yeah. We were talking about these things, too. Let me see. Let me make sure I got myself straight here. Yeah, we're good. Okay. Tchaikovsky. Now, in our preview video, we talked about the most perverse Tchaikovsky performance ever, which was Stokowski's version of the Fourth. That was perverse good. There's also perverse bad. I did a video on the worst ever Brahms Third Symphony, and that was Stokowski too, because he could just wreck things sometimes. I mean, he really could. But he also conducted Tchaikovsky pretty straight, and better than anybody else. Because the one thing that he understood about Tchaikovsky was the passion and the excitement, and because he had no shame, he conducts it completely without inhibition, whether he's playing with it or not. And believe me, Tchaikovsky doesn't need any help most of the time. He really doesn't. He could create hysteria and insanity and over-the-top nuts with voluptuous, crazy sonorities like the best of them, as we all know. And Stokowski gives Tchaikovsky his due in this recording on Everest of Francesca da Rimini. First of all, it's one of the great Francescas out there, a piece that almost everybody does badly, because nobody gets the hell music. Nobody whips it up to necessary craziness of excitement. You don't hear the tam-tam at the end. You don't hear... It's so frustrating. So frustrating. But this was 1950s with the Stadium Symphony Orchestra of New York, which was the New York Philharmonic in its summer home of Lewisohn Stadium. And it's astonishing. This is on Everest, too. And the Everest catalog, I'm not sure where it is now. Sometimes you get it like on print-on-demand things, and it's, I don't know what's happening with it. But it'll be back. Don't worry. Everything's coming back. Someone's got their hands on it. Omega had it at one point. I don't know. I don't know where it is now, but we'll find it, and we'll get this stuff out there. Because this Francesca is respectful of the score. It's basically only what Tchaikovsky wrote, and it's stunning. It's just plain stunning. It's marvelous. And it comes with an equally great Hamlet, a piece which is neglected, but Stokowski did so much neglected repertoire in addition to the contemporary repertoire. He would play anything and play the bejesus out of it. So, Francesca da Rimini, definitely on our list. Next, let's see, what's this one? Oh, we talked about this a little bit because I did my talk on the best performances of Shostakovich's Symphony No. 6. And I didn't mention Stokowski's with the Chicago Symphony. It's definitely one of the great ones. So consider this in addition to that talk. It certainly belongs there. It's absolutely fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. It was coupled originally with Khachaturian's Third Symphony, the most horrible piece of music ever written by anyone, probably. It's, oh my God, what a bad piece. And he plays it fabulously with Chicago. What do you expect? That's in this RCA box. 14 CDs of Stokowski's, stereo recordings from 1954 to 1975. And it is as great as Shostakovich Sixth as has ever been. Stokowski was a great exponent of Shostakovich. He conducted the Fifth often. There's a Fifth on Everest. He did the 11th. He did the Leningrad when everybody was fighting over it back in the day. He did the first. He was a wonderful, wonderful Shostakovich conductor. And so it's only fair that we talk about, I think this is his best Shostakovich performance. And again, it's a performance that's one of the greatest of a less than well-known symphony, which was particularly less than well-known at the time that Stokowski made this recording, which makes it only the more significant as, an iconic example of his work with music that nobody else was playing. Next, oh my goodness, yes, we have to do Bach transcriptions. I mean, Stokowski's Bach transcriptions need no introduction from me. They are sui generis. They created a whole appetite for these things, and they were his calling card, and they're wonderful. They're completely unidiomatic in every possible way, which is what makes them so delicious, because they are idiomatically expressive. They are not idiomatic orchestrally or period performance-y wise or anything. They're just idiomatic as great music, beautifully presented. This is the one in that EMI icon box, or it's on Warner now, I guess. I think this is overall his best collection of Bach transcriptions. It's with his orchestra again, but he did some in Philly, and he did some with the very fine selection with the Czech Philharmonic that's on that in the Decca Phase 4 box. There's some of the RCA box. There's Bach everywhere. He did them as encores. I mean, that was his calling card. This particular disc has the Passacaglia and Fugue in C minor, and then Comme Susur Tot, and a little bit the Bourrée and Sarabande from Suite Number 2 in A minor, Ein Festebourg, which everybody wants, the Sinfonia from the Christmas Oratorio, the Little Fugue in G minor, the Air on a G string, which you just gotta hear, and let's see, Mein Jesu was vor Seelenweh. Oh, isn't that fun? And let's see, the Partita Number 3 in E, the Prelude, BWV 1006, and finally, of course, the Toccata and Fugue in D minor, which you just got to hear, which was, of course, the thing on Fantasia that had everybody running for Stokowski's Bach. So, yes, you got to have a Bach transcription disc. And then, let's see, we got a couple more, three more things. You ready? This one will shock you. Guarantee it. Brahms 4. Brahms 4 with the New Philharmonia Orchestra on RCA and stereo. One of the great Brahms fourths. I kid you not. He could be so perverse in Brahms, especially the third, which sort of most conductors blow and kind of tempts them to pull it about like taffy. I mean, Furtwängler did that too, and he also blew the third more often than not. But boy, is this exciting. This is a swift, absolutely no nonsense, straightforward, thrilling Brahms fourth. Everything is on the quick side, not too quick, I don't think. Some people like to have it, moon around a bit more. I think you'll be thrilled by this, and I think you'll be shocked by it. Just how completely single-mindedly ferocious it is. It really is devastating emotionally. Absolutely fantastic. And so you need to hear it. You need to hear it as an example of what he could do with serious music, if you want to call it that, when he was as serious as the music, and also what he could do at the very end of his life. These are late recordings, and they are astonishing. He was in his 90s when he was doing this, and there isn't a shred of tiredness or lack of freshness or any sense of age. It's so urgent and youthful. It's actually quite similar in that respect to the recent Honeck recording on reference recordings with the Pittsburgh Symphony, which was also very urgent and youthful. It's an astonishing achievement, not just for a man of his age, as a Brahms performance. And it amazes me. It still does. So that's definitely a must. Also essential, and this will come as no surprise, Ives Fourth. This piece was premiered by Stokowski. He made the first recording. It is still sonically and interpretively as good as anything out there and better than most. And I think that is just something, especially when you consider what the work is. Ives Fourth. I mean, it's a everything but the kitchen sink apocalyptic craziness. But apocalyptic craziness was Stokowski's watchword. That was what he did. And he did it better than anybody. And boy, is this fantastic, this performance. And it's come up sounding so well. There are moments in here that he just nails. I think the opening movement, with the way that the hymn, "Watchmen tell us of the night, what the signs of promise are," with all the stuff happening around it. It's amazing. I sang that. Hymn at Trinity Church in New Haven, where Ives himself performed and played when he was at Yale, because my high school glee club, Hopkins Grammar, always did a Christmas concert at Trinity Church on the Green in New Haven. And, I knew the hymn. And when I first heard Ives said it, I was like, oh, wow, isn't that great? But he gets the atmosphere and the mystery. Also the finale. The finale has that transcendental quality when the wordless chorus comes in with all of the glittering sounds around it and the constant tread of the solo percussion ensemble underneath. He does it better than anybody ever has. There's just stuff that he could do better than anyone. Why? Because these are moments that require atmosphere. They're all about timbre, about chords, about mystery and being evocative. And my God, he could just nail that stuff. And he does. He absolutely does. So, Ives Symphony No. 4 on Sony. This is with the American Symphony Orchestra. You'll notice all of these are with different orchestras, and as I said, it makes no difference. Stokowski got what he wanted from everybody. Whether it was a pickup group or a regularly constituted orchestra, it made no difference. Finally, however, last but not least, my vote for this is number 10 in the list. Is it the greatest? No. But is it one of the greatest? Yes. And this one's going to shock you. I guarantee it. It is the Eroica, Beethoven's Eroica. This was one of the last recordings Stokowski made, I think. What was the date of this? It was 1974. Yeah, it was really at the end of his career. He was 90 something. And it is the most fresh, spontaneous, exciting, marvelous sounding Eroica you've ever heard in your life. Now, in the clips here, I've got a couple clips here. There was the Wagner is one of them. The Coda of Francesca da Rimini is, I think, the other one. And finally, the Coda of the Eroica Symphony finale. It's amazing. Not since Zell. I mean, there are things he does to help the orchestration a little bit. Not terrible. There's nothing that's not like, some of his other handling of classical period music. There isn't anything here that's antithetical to what Beethoven intended. But, Zell diddles the brass parts too. You hear the horns, the sonority of the horns, the three horns. You realize the symphony has three horns. And the trio of the scherzo, and at the very end, it's just glorious. And even the way he hangs on to the last chord. You know how most people take the end of the Eroica, right? Ba-da-da-da-da-da-dum, blam, blam. It's so unsatisfying. Well, he holds on to it. It's blam, bam, just that little bit. It's the kind of interpretive license that's entirely acceptable in light of the satisfaction it gives you after the fact. And this performance is full of little touches like that. It's absolutely extraordinary, and I urge you to hear it, because you hear at the end of his life what he could do with standard repertoire, standard classical repertoire that he wasn't supposed to be good at, that he theoretically had no respect for. He does. He does, and he does marvelous interpretive things. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary performance, again, of a freshness and vitality. I could talk about it all day. The Funeral March. The Funeral March is practically a period instrument performance. It's 13 and a bit minutes long. Very, very quick. This is a movement that can take 16 to 18 minutes in other hands. But he's not sentimental about it. He doesn't gush, and it's a march. And you hear it, and you go, it's wonderful. Just wonderful. So, Beethoven's Eroica, Symphony No. 3, with Leopold Stokowski. I think this selection of 10 recordings really does give you a very, very fair and comprehensive selection of his range. his astonishing range. I don't think there was another 20th century conductor who had anything like his range. His curiosity, his willingness to take risks, his complete willingness to lose himself in a piece of music and make it come alive on his terms. There will never be another one like him. There truly will not be. And we're so lucky we have what we do on disc. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great time with Stokowski. Take care.